We have put an incredible show together for you today. We understand our demographics are mostly women, maybe 61% females who watch the show. So why not really dedicate a show to females? Starting with Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman, New York Times bestselling author. She's going to talk about women's issues and not so much the information we get as the misinformation we get. Then I'm going to teach a little bit about PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Disease, and I'm going to teach a little bit about coffee. Many of you want coffee, so we'll discuss that. Kyle and I are going to be talking about cancer and fungus, okay? And Jenny Herbachik is here. The whole gang's here today. You are going to love the show we put together for you, and now it starts. My name is Doug Kaufman. For the past 40 years, I've dedicated my life and even my career to finding the root cause of disease. Join me in a team of physicians, pharmacists, and scientists, and soon you too will know the cause. There she is. Nutrition's First Lady, Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman joins us today. Folks, we need to talk about foods in your diet. She has a new book. I don't know if you remember, she was on my show a few years ago. She had a book called The Fat Flush, runaway bestseller. She wouldn't return my calls at that time. That's how much I want.
Come on.
No, I'm kidding. I wanted her on the show just to introduce you to this whole fat flush philosophy. Now it's a new fat flush plan. New York Times bestseller was The Fat Flush. Same author, Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman. Thank you, number one, for coming in.
My pleasure.
Number two, help us clear the air with simple foods that we go to a restaurant and eat: fruits, vegetables, meats, eggs, nuts. Where's your heart when you talk about fat, especially, and maybe not fruits and vegetables? Where do fruits, for example, fit in your program?
You know, I think fruits are healthy. However, if you're an individual that's taken a course of antibiotics, if you have some kind of autoimmune disorder that hasn't been resolved, or if you know you're loaded with fungus, if you're very bloated, if you're very bloaty, if you're constipated, if you have fungus on your toenails, I think you've got to be very careful about fruits. There seems to be this myth floating around that fruits are man's best friend. And I don't believe that's the case until you get rid of the yeast, which loves to consume the fruit, even the sugar that is in the fruit, which is fructose, because I believe any kind of sugar can cross-react with glucose and provide problems and will fuel yeast. So as far as I'm concerned, fruit is healthy in moderation. If you have a full-fledged yeast infection that so many people have, if it's a systemic infection, if you've got problems with stuffiness and problems in the sinuses, you got to starve yourself of sugar for at least 2 weeks, including no fruits, and then go back to the very low glycemic, low fructose fruits, and there on in only eat 15 grams of fructose per day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking berries.
Yeah.
You love berries. It's on one of your plans.
Yep. Yep.
I know that. I've read all your books. I love your books.
Thank you.
So we've got the berries.
The
We've
green
got
apples,
a green apple,
grapefruit,
Granny Smith
yeah.
apple, an apple, maybe a pink grapefruit, half a pink grapefruit, maybe an orange, maybe a small peach. That seems to be fine. But if there's a serious yeast and fungal infection, which we know is the precursor of so many autoimmune diseases and perhaps cancer, as you so eloquently have written about and lecture, then you got to cut it out for the time being. Even
Peaches and oranges, I don't. I'm kind of a grapefruit, green apples, berries for the first few weeks or a month, especially when you have a serious disorder. And that's all the fruits I allow. Now, vegetables, you're very bullish on vegetables. All of your books talk about the health benefits.
Oh, we're big on veggies.
Yeah.
I mean, veggies are where it's at. And I like a lot of raw jicama because people need something sweet. And I'll tell you something, it is the biggest fat flush tip I can give anybody that's listening to us today. Good. Very crunchy, very sweet. I use it as a dipper. So I'll make an avocado dip, a lovely little guacamole. We've got great recipes in there, some guacamole recipes that are to die for, and a little dipper that where we use jicama and maybe a pea pod. Love it, and it's very satisfying. I cut up jicama, I put it in a salad, and you think it's a green apple.
Yeah. Are you worried about meats today with the hormones and antibiotics and so forth? So
I am, so it has to be organic or grass-fed.
Grass-fed, grass-finished, I like that. Eggs, nuts, seeds?
Eggs for most people are healthful. For some, it's a major allergen. And if you read my book, you'll see it is the #1 allergic producing food for people that have gallbladder pain. It is the #1 producer of gallstones. Hint, hint, it's in the book.
My son, Evan, who is 34, wow, is he that old? I see he and his wife get up in the morning when they stay with us out here in Texas. They get up in the morning, the first thing, they fill 8 ounces of water up from our water thing and squeeze half a lemon in it. Guess where they learned this? And he always reminds me of that. You know, they read your initial book. What is that doing? You would think that's very acid. Gosh, do I wake up in a very acid?
Well, it turns to alkaline in the system is what
Yeah.
the issue is, and it's very cleansing. It cleanses the palate, it tonifies the liver, the kidneys, and it starts off peristaltic action. So it's the best way to cleanse your system after a night of fasting, so to speak.
Yeah.
Love that, and I love my dandelion root tea.
Dandelion root tea is so good for the liver. Think glutathione. The book is called The New Fat Flush Plan. Amazon.com has it. It's always such a joy to sit down with you. We did a couple of podcasts, so if you want more information, just go to my website, knowthecause.com, and listen to these podcasts because we could go on and on about this woman and this book. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much.
You know, more and more, folks, we're seeing something in women called polycystic ovarian syndrome or disease. Polycystic, work that word out. Now, if you have PCOS, you know about it. If you don't, I want to educate you a little bit because I think there might be a component doctors, gynecologists just aren't aware of. PCOS, poly, what's that mean? Many, right? Polycystic, many cysts on the ovary. Oh, okay, that's what polycystic ovarian syndrome, not disease, it's a syndrome. And it's always associated with other things going on in a woman's life, hormonal aberrations, etc. Maybe we've hit on something here because of a book that was published a while ago, but I want to, for those of you who don't understand PCOS, it's a big deal for women who have it. It affects about 5 to 10% of women of childbearing ages, 18 to 44. The cause, says WebMD, and this is WebMD all over it, the cause of this disease is not fully understood, but genetics may be a factor. Every time I read that, I just kind of want to go, it's just the mantra. We don't know what causes any disease, but step right up, we got pills for it, right? Why don't we hone in these brilliant scientists, researchers, and doctors, major universities, and these guys on WebMD, which is the pharmaceutical industry, bright guys. Why doesn't somebody look for the cause instead of further identifying it and making medications around the disease, okay? Small cysts on the ovaries, that's what it means. These aren't harmful, but can lead to hormonal imbalances. There is no cure for PCOS, but controlling it lowers your risk of infertility, miscarriages, diabetes, heart disease, and uterine cancer. Guys, I want you to know, it's a big deal to have PCOS. I think first come the hormonal imbalances, and then comes the PCOS, and then comes more dangerous symptoms. If you don't put the fire out, it's going to spread. What causes the fire? Female issues and fungus. In his book, Mycotoxins, and this guy's intense, he's out of, I think, Kansas State. Brilliant. I've read so much of his work. Professor John F. Leslie, Google him, look him up, states that one estrogenic mycotoxin, a mycotoxin is a poison made by fungus, right, is called zearalenone, might be the culprit when it comes to fully understanding PCOS. In animals, this zearalenone induces hyperestrogenic syndrome, vulvovaginitis, and large uteri and large nipples and ovarian cysts. Okay, wow, a mycotoxin, a fungal poison can do all that. Folks, obviously, for obvious reasons, we don't test humans with these things. We test animals, and we see breakthrough bleeding, we see spontaneous abortion, and we see horrible, horrible things happen when these mycotoxins come into our life. Where do these mycotoxins come from? Would you be shocked to know that corn sometimes has zearalenone in it? Would you be shocked to know that we are using as a growth promoter in our meat supply something called zeranol, which I believe is as potent, if not more, than the mycotoxin zearalenone? So as we reduce antibiotics in our meat supply, what I'm seeing is the increase of other hormones that make the cow and the chicken get fat so we can sell it for more money. Just be careful. Okay, and finally this, I love this book, The Missing Diagnosis. Dr. Orion Truss wrote this book. Linked to urethritis, cystitis, repeated vaginal infections, PMS, menstrual problems, and the yeast Candida albicans. He writes this in this book, and you can still get a copy of it. It's called The Missing Diagnosis. It's important, folks, when you don't know the cause, we run from doctor to doctor to doctor to get diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis, to get pill after pill after pill. Maybe, just maybe, your fork and spoon, you're eating the wrong foods. Sometimes they have mold in them. Just think that way. First, Nurse Jenny Herbacek talks about stress. If you have cancer, you know about stress, so she's going to tie the two together, cancer and stress. Then I'm going to talk a few minutes about why coffee isn't on the Phase 1 diet.
Hi, I'm Jenny Herbacek with the Cancer Connection. Did you realize that when you're stressed, your body ramps up its production of stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine? And chronic stress is a recipe for sickness because it leads to systemic inflammation that suppresses the immune system. Studies suggest that physiological stress can affect a tumor's ability to grow and spread. So it pays to deal with your stress. Find a relaxation therapy that works best for you and knock out stress as a contributing factor to cancer. For Know the Cause, I'm Jenny Herbacek.
I was just thinking, when I was a young boy, I'd wake up just about every morning and I'd hear a percolator going in the kitchen. You remember those? How old are you, right? The percolator, where it'd be mixing up the coffee and the bean and so forth, the water in the bean. Mom and Dad, Dad would get up 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and get that thing going. And he and Mom would sit down and enjoy several cups of coffee. And then along about 9 o'clock, we heard again, the percolator going again. So that's the way they used to make coffee in the old days. Now we have these machines. But you're looking at a guy who ended up in Vietnam in the medical corps in 1970 and 71 and never had a cup of coffee. Isn't that interesting? The smell, I remember being good, but I just didn't like, look, I had ADD, I probably still do. The tasting of a cup of coffee, and man, I was gone, boom, 90 miles an hour. But I wrote a book. The book was written a dozen years ago. It was called The Germ That Causes Cancer. It's a book about fungus and its ability to mimic or to cause cancer. Now, I've since written a big research paper and we're working on another one. I think many times cancer is misdiagnosed and it's a fungus that starts it. And antifungal drugs and a changed diet, I think would help most cancer patients. I've been beating that drum for probably 30 years. But let's get back to the cup of Java, the cup of Joe. When I began writing that book, my friend, a physician, came over to the house and we said, we got to work all weekend. And he said, Doug, you're going to need some of this. And it was an iced 4-in-a-pack coffee. And I said, oh, what is it? Coffee? I don't do that. And he said, by tonight at 10 o'clock, you're going to need this. Sure enough, I opened the top and it didn't look like coffee. It was white. It was called vanilla something. And I drank it, and I'm telling you, at 1 o'clock in the morning, boom, 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 boom. I was reviewing these research papers. I was writing that book. By Sunday morning, we had completed it, and we were thrilled. So I took a new look at Joe. Joe and I became friends. The Phase 1 diet that I ask people to get on doesn't have coffee on it. What we try and do on the Phase 1 diet is break addictions, dairy, alcohol, coffee, etc. Sometimes giving your body a break from any of these things really does good things to your health. And then you can get a baseline of which to really begin studying what coffee does. Because I waited till I was 50 years old to have my first real cup of coffee. I know now that I'll have a cup a day on our Phase 2 diet. This is okay because this is a legume, a bean. Coffee is a bean. And science has been saying, well, a cup of Joe doesn't hurt anybody. As a matter of fact, 2 cups a day might be better for your heart, the ticker, the blood supply, and so forth. I'm reading that with great interest. I just asked people on my Phase 1 diet not to have any. Then when we graduate to our Phase 2, you can have it. Along comes a guy I know very well and I really like, and he has a coffee that he has tested quantifiably for Mycotoxins. Fungus make poisons, even inside the human body, even in coffee beans. These are called mycotoxins. Myco means fungus, toxin is poison. So he tests his coffee bean for mycotoxin exposure, and if they aren't there, he goes ahead and puts it in bags. And as the article points out, it's expensive. You know what? I don't have a problem paying a little more if I'm not getting into these mycotoxins. In Spain, they did studies on 100 coffee and found mycotoxins, fungal metabolites, fungal poisons, in 100% of the samples. Some so minor it doesn't make any difference. Look, we'd all be dead if drinking coffee killed you with these mycotoxins in 1 cup. But it goes on to say that the reason this man is doing so well with his company is because he doesn't recommend putting sugar in it. Instead, something called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, right? Butter, meat. Don't put meat in your coffee. He says put a big slab of butter in there. And then something called medium chain triglycerides. Now, CLAs are hugely antifungal. So if there's arguably fungus in your cup of coffee, the CLA in the butter is going to help remediate that. Medium chain triglycerides, or MCT, is an oil derived from what? Coconut. And there's lauric acid and caprylic acid in coconut oil that makes it hugely antifungal. So what this man has done is really brilliant if you think about it. He's saying, okay, all coffees probably have little amounts of mycotoxins. I don't think mine does, but just in case, instead of milk, use a pat of real butter, not margarine, real butter. And use a little bit of MCT, right? This oil, medium chain triglyceride. And this oil makes all the difference in the world. It tastes delicious. So move your Joe around, try different approaches to it, and try and remember it often has these fungal metabolites in it, but yours doesn't have to because now you know. I owe an apology, I think, to many in the medical community because for years and years, 17 alone, Kyle, I've been doing this show and I've been rubbing pretty hard on doctors, technologies, diagnoses, tests, pills, etc. And then I get continuing medical education to speak to a group of doctors on the fungus role in cancer. My knees are shaking, Kyle. I'm in San Diego, my knees are knocking. And I gave this, what I think is a great talk, all the science. Folks, all I am is a puzzle maker. I've just put the pieces of the puzzle together. Well, cancer is a DNA disease. What wrecks your DNA, right? Cancer needs sugar to thrive. So does fungus. So I put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Well, Kyle, after I get done in San Diego, there's a Japanese doctor, 2 doctors, I think it was he and his wife, came up to talk to me. And I thought this line of doctors were going to chop my head off. I'm Doug Kaufman. I make some of them mad. In fact, the kindest, most wonderful people. The first question was, I have many women who I have treated. He was a gyno-oncologist. I didn't even know such a specialty existed, but gynecology oncologist, all he sees is cancer, reproductive cancer. He said, I have many women who I have followed for over 20 years, giving them diflucan for chronic vaginal yeast infections. Now that group of women have uterine cancers or ovarian cancers. And he said, doctor, he called me doctor. I told him I play one on TV. But he said, do you think that yeast is either being misdiagnosed as cancer or can that yeast turn into cancer? Wow, wow. And I do one of these. If you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a doctor who sees a lot of cancer this stuff, they become different. And then there was a doctor out here who's a pulmonologist. Yeah. And I introduced him to this laboratory owner who does fungus tests all day long. He's a pathologist. And he wrote me an email that said, he attended my conference. I was the keynote speaker in Plano, Texas at another CME, continuing medical education. And guys, they almost get teary. And he wrote me an email that said, I can't believe we have met. Thank God we met. You have totally changed my practice. So I get a call from his office manager day before yesterday. I'm telling you guys, he has totally changed his practice. Wow. He is finding that 90% of what is growing when they do these endoscopies, what is growing in there, gee, just isn't the thick mucopus or bacteria that we thought. To wit, we prescribed an antibiotic.
Wow. I've seen this a lot with the physicians that I've been around. And it's true, you know, a lot of times we are around physicians who are aggravated and angry at the whole natural health community, and sometimes they've never even heard the real natural health story. They've certainly not heard the fungus story. Fungus is a little bit deeper down than even natural health. But they don't hear it. They only hear what the pharmaceutical reps tell them. They have enough time to read the journals, which are oftentimes bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. And this is me not beating up the pharmaceutical industry. It's me saying that they don't ever get the other side. Whatever political persuasion you're on, if you only hear one political side and you never hear the one that you might agree with, it's going to be a problem. When they finally do see this, I agree with you. I was at the first CME that you did in Plano. It was extraordinary. A couple of 300 doctors, they're all having dinner while you do the keynote address. They all stop clinging their silverware and their dishes, and they're listening. And you finish at about 6, 7 o'clock and don't leave the hotel until 11 or midnight because so many people, so many of these doctors have questions. How do I do it? Tell me the whole thing. Where do I learn this?
Some of them had sons and daughters with cancer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they were turning to little old me. Wow. How do we prescribe these things? Here's an important note here. Antifungals are going to be a tiny part of this equation. It's antimycotoxins that we need in pharmacies. We have none, as best I know. Where do you get them? You wrote me a list the other day.
Yeah.
Alpha lipoic acid.
NAC, N-acetylcysteine, milk thistle,
Yep.
chlorophyll,
Yep.
activated charcoal. These are antimycotics from the health food store.
Antimycotoxins. It's not just antifungal, although antifungal medicines will help cancer and diabetic patients, I believe. But it's antimycotoxins that you really need to look for, and there isn't a pharmacy that has those. But there are little stores called health food stores that do. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
And as they say in Hollywood, that's a wrap today. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Dr. Ann Louise Gittleman, for coming in and teaching us not so much about the information, folks, as she alluded to in the opening of today's show, but the misinformation we're getting out there. Thank you to Nurse Jenny Herbacek. Always that cancer connection so many of you love, you write and tell us. By the way, did you know every couple of weeks I do a live show on Facebook, so you can just go to that and ask your questions live. Thank you even to the Green Coffee Cup. We'll see you next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.